First of all, before I do start, I would like to make an acknowledgement to the land that we're on, the beautiful land that we're on, cared for very well by the past guardians of this nation and the present and emerging that have taken care of this land that we live on. Just want to say my name is Stefan and I'm very humbled to speak here as a relative newbie in the vegan community, so it's an honour to kind of speak here in front of all of these people today. Thank you. Loud applause, thank you. So I'm not going to spend long, but I'm just going to spend 2 minutes introducing my vegan journey and then I'll get into the topic of my discussion. Like many, perhaps, I started the first 30 years of my life on a socially endorsed, recommended diet of meat, eggs, dairy, cheese, fish, all of those kind of things. And I was very resistant to even vegetarianism, to giving up any foods was my journey. And I held quite strong judgments against those that were vegan or vegetarian, which is interesting now that I'm here, despite those not that long ago thoughts. Obviously, it was only with exposure that I changed that very stubborn viewpoint to then come this way. So that's my brief journey. It was 30 years on a very standardized diet, and then of course I went vegan, or vegetarian 2 years ago, and vegan now about a year. So that's all I'll discuss about me. What I'll be talking about today is the significant kind of cultural, peer pressure, social, cultural, national pressures that are preventing people from becoming vegan, and of course maybe even staying vegan or feeling uncomfortable being vegan. So I think it's important to unpack why even myself was resistant to veganism, and perhaps why other people out there might be resistant to veganism. And if we understand what those things are culturally, societally, then we might be able to understand or be able to communicate a little bit better as to why people are not at least open-minded. I was actually completely closed-minded to veganism, and why I was like that, and why potentially others are too. So I think it's really important because I think we all, I'm not sure who's vegan in this crowd, fantastic. We all probably felt some pressure at some stage, so we all have our own journey and personal story to share. But what I'll be doing now is more broad things and kind of coming from that approach. The reason why, and that's why I'm so passionate about it, because it is such an important factor. So what I will be discussing, this is the last kind of general broad term I'm saying, isn't just specific to veganism, it's actually applicable to anything. And what I mean by that is society pressures in general that prevent us becoming who we know we want to be, or our true authentic selves. But when we talk about veganism specifically, when we're perhaps trying to get the message out, or even preconceived pre-veganism, we're in a place of privilege, and we're kind of saying we have to give something up. And giving something up from a place of privilege is something that takes a bit of an adjustment. Even though most of us wouldn't see it as giving something up, pre-veganism it can be seen as I can't have all these foods anymore. And it is giving something up until you switch your perspective of it's a privilege and it's something that, and it's not an entitlement though, there's a difference. So what are we talking about as the general concepts of why non-veganism is such a popular choice and why it's such a safe choice? Like anything, there is safety in numbers, and obviously being an omnivore or a non-vegan is safe. Everyone's doing it, and therefore it's familiar and it's popular, and that's why it's so attractive, because it's group mentality. And that's why would you make a change when everyone else is doing this thing that's widely acceptable and legal and all of that thing? So that's why we wouldn't even consider making a change, because it is a majority. And of course it's justified when everyone's doing it. The flip side of that, of course, is the risk of being in a majority group, like an omnivore, like a non-vegan, and actively choosing to be in a minority group, which we see in other areas of society. For example, heterosexuality versus homosexuality, and actually choosing to identify with something that is more aligned with your core values. So being vegan is an unpopular choice, so you're going against the grain, and that's why it can be scary. So people that don't have the highest self-confidence or self-assurance might be inclined to stay with the majority because it could be viewed as a social suicide to actively go into a minority, judged, scrutinised group. So there can be a lot of pressure in saying, well, I'm already unpopular, I don't want to be more unpopular, I don't want to risk being scrutinised even further or judged even further. So the analogy I like using, it's like you're sitting in the back of the bus and you're choosing to sit at the front of the bus, not with the cool kids anymore. So it can be quite a confronting, even social dynamic to choose to be vegan because it's just scary. Despite saying all this, I think we've all made that choice of choosing to be uncool because we would rather approve of ourselves and be disapproved by others than choose to be approved by others and not content with your own life decisions. Yes, so that's one thing I like to say about, and also it's scary to go into, I'm sure a lot of us have heard the words as pre-vegans of the stereotypes of becoming vegan. We're annoying, we're hippie, we're preachy, we're weak, we're unhealthy, all of these things. So why would you want to enter that stereotype? So a lot of people just want to avoid the label. I don't want to be vegan because I just don't want to be associated with them because of these stereotypes that are often not true but are very widely accepted amongst the non-vegan community. And obviously, yeah, you're just essentially going into a group that is labelled as possibly extreme or open to criticism, as I mentioned before. So, with that all being said, that's why having a vegan community is so important, because in a minority group, which we currently still are but growing, having that community support and having that mental health check with people that are making sure they're okay in being scrutinised, being judged, being confronted with these kind of things. So the next part of my talk is talking about actual identities and how a lot of us, it's ego-based, so it's, we are familiar with past selves or a self that we've established our whole lives, and letting go of that self can be scary because we know that doing this works, and any unfamiliar territory in our life being is scary and it can be resistant to change. So there's three main and then one extra bonus one I'll be talking about today, and that is identities that are very common in society that prevent people from making the vegan change or even considering the vegan change. They are masculinity, they are cultural and national identities, and it is even just a general understanding or medical or educational identities that we have with science proving that we need all of these things to be healthy, or advocating that we need these things to be healthy. And again, that's something that's we have to fight against, or at least be open-minded and curious about challenging that viewpoint. So first I'll talk about masculinity. Obviously, as a male, there is a very, there's the typical alpha male vision that we see. The typical alpha male is not only confident, but is also strong and muscly and that kind of thing. There is obviously the stereotype of if you can eat meat, you're a man, or it's very manly to eat meat, therefore by association, by not eating meat, you are unmanly or could be perceived as unmanly. It's obviously important to unpack where that came from. So obviously, I believe it's from the times of hunting. Obviously, men used to hunt, and that used to be to provide for their loved ones. And you would die if we didn't kill animals. So I think we're all, even as vegans, I can't speak on behalf of you, but I'm grateful that in the past we killed animals, because that's probably why we're still here. It was a necessity, which is very different to where we are with Coles and Woolworths and fresh food markets. So being able to provide for your family is what it means to be masculine. To provide for the weak and the vulnerable and those that needed you is what it means to be a masculine figure in a tribe. So therefore, we've kind of associated killing meat for survival to just being able to eat it. is manly, and that's where I think that came from. But if we look at the other definition of masculinity, which I like to abide by, and I think it's key to not only to redefine or to at least question what it means to be masculine or to be a man. And what I believe that to be is to be caring for the vulnerable, be opening, be brave, be courageous, to be confident in standing up what you believe in despite what everyone else is doing. And of course, females can also present these qualities also, I want to definitely acknowledge. But of course, I would not define it a very manly or masculine thing to end the life of a vulnerable being, a weak being, an at-risk being. We can show our dominance as a species by dominating the entire planet and controlling it as we currently are, or we can show how powerful we are by actually showing compassion and letting the world be as it is. And I like that definition a lot better than the dominating one. So obviously as a man, I would like to it's even interesting reflecting on this example about 10 years ago, where I'm not sure who's heard of the restaurant Hippo Creek, but it's a very much a meat-eating restaurant. And I did the 1 kilo steak challenge. And that's really annoying for me to say, and very confronting for me to acknowledge now. But I guess there was social proof in that, in being able to eat 1 kilo of meat, which is kind of sickening for me to think about and discuss now. But at the time, it was a peer social proof exercise that I believed in, which is even crazy to believe that that's eating the flesh of a dead animal proves yourself as a man, which is interesting that stereotype has kind of engulfed in society. So yeah, last thing I'll say about masculinity is essentially just redefining what it means or what it's typically seen as to be masculine, and that is using your power not to dominate but to actually stand up for those that are weaker than yourselves. Or I say this fortunately, I'm fairly top at the hierarchy of privilege as a white male who's 6'2", so I don't see many aspects of my life that are unprivileged, just given my skin appearance, given my stature, given the lucky situation and circumstance that I'm in. I could stay there and just stay there and enjoy all the being at the top of the tree, but I think as most males are, we can use this position to stand up for the less vulnerable, and that's what I challenge all men to do. And of course, encourage all women to support that new defined masculinity of standing up for the weak and vulnerable. I also just find it a bit ironic that even from a romantic or sexual perspective, I know that having a dog as a male is seen as a favourable characteristic, because women may see that as a trait of looking after a bit weak and vulnerable, yet that same man is eating dead animals. So I find that a bit of an interesting conflict, where it's attractive to see a male or female caring for a dog because we know how vulnerable and weak and dependent they are, yet in the very same breath we will admire that person as they're cooking us butter chicken for dinner. So it's a very interesting double standard there. The next thing I'd like to talk about is cultural and national identities. I'll just summarise the masculinity one. That was possibly one of the many roadblocks as to why, not the only one, but that would have been one of the roadblocks as to why I didn't even consider being even vegetarian or vegan to begin with. It was because of my potential perceived unmasculinity for making that choice. So now when it comes to cultural and national, I'm going to use my example as an example, but I absolutely agree that what I'm about to say is applicable to any nationality, any ethnicity and culture. I'm Italian, I have an Italian background, and with every single national identity has a food culture. And food, fortunately or unfortunately, is a huge part of a culture. So I could speak for Italian, but I know that you could extrapolate this to probably any culture, but are you Italian if you don't enjoy Italian food? It's such an integral part of being Italian, and you can insert your culture with any Italian. Food is such an important part of your cultural identity. So you are giving up, I don't know what percent, but a fair amount of your Italianism by giving up food, as it's such an expressive way of generations of recipes, generations of eating together, and now you're almost denying a huge integral part of your culture by saying no to it. And that can be quite a confronting thing. I've heard a lot of people come up to me and say, I would love to be vegan or vegetarian, but my family eats curries twice a week and they need lamb in it. And it's such an important part of who I am and who we are. So that there's that strong attachment to a national identity. So of course, that's my Italian story, and of course you get your nonna saying, you know, you need to eat the meat and all that kind of stuff. So you get those kind of stereotypes of the Mediterranean diet and all these things that almost a staple that you need these things to be a part of your culture. And of course, if we talk about Australian culture, which most of us would at least semi-identify with, the most Australian thing you can do is put a barbecue on. The most Australian thing we can do is use a sausage sizzle as a way to raise money for donations. Therefore, if running a barbecue is the most Australian thing you can do, it could almost be implied that by not running a barbecue or not putting meat on a barbecue can be viewed as un-Australian, almost by association. This is Australian, by not doing it, you might be less Australian. And there's just obviously an incredible, sausage sizzle culture, and obviously when it comes to Australia Day, I know I used to very much look forward to the Sam Pekovic lamb on the barbie ads because I thought they were amazing. But of course, we're celebrating our culture, an integral part of our culture, by celebrating putting dead animals on a barbecue. And every culture, every nation has this same kind of identity. So when it comes to masculinity and Australian, let's just say combined, as an Australian male, I can prove my Australianism and my masculinity by putting dead animal meat on a barbecue. And that's what culture is almost encouraging or implying. So it's about rewriting what it really means to be Australian and what it really means to be a man. Last thing about national and cultural is there's two things we can feel when we're non-vegan about wanting to make the vegan change. Either, as I mentioned, because food is such an integral part of so many cultures, you feel that you're either letting down your ancestry, so you can feel that there's parents or grandparents that you're letting down, or you can feel that they're judging you or feeling that you're going, against their culture by not choosing to continue what they've done for generations. So that's a pressure that I know many feel, and then again, that can be a roadblock that many have in terms of even considering going vegan, because there's so much pressure behind that, possibly from family, traditional, cultural perspective. Another one, of course, is educational identity. So I'm in the medical profession by trade, and I know a lot of other doctors that have gone through nutrition training through university. And even generally widely accepted, we've all seen the food pyramid, and we know, or science suggests, that we should be eating meat, eggs, fish, dairy to be healthy. And of course, fighting against this instilled belief that we've all seen the food pyramid probably from about 6 years old, and that belief gets entrenched very deeply, and fighting against something that's been so true for your whole life can be quite a blockage as well. Even looking at well-endorsed websites like Heart Foundation and even health websites, they all have meat, egg and dairy on them. So fighting against those pressures can be quite difficult as well, despite the mounting evidence that there's very strong contrary evidence to that. The last bonus kind of identity that I would like to talk about, so the ones I've spoken about so far, masculinity can be hindering to the vegan journey. Australia or your own culture can be hindering, and even your educational and medical identity can also be hindering. But the one that I like to talk about most in particular is an identity that actually helps us. And that is the identity of an animal lover. So this is an identity that I think we all connected to, where we realised that there was a bit of hypocrisy in our desire to pet and love a dog, pet and love a cat, not cause harm to any humans. and of course losing that connection between other sentient beings. So, of course, we've all kind of toyed with the idea of a pet lover versus an animal lover, and them being very different things. So it's being a speciesist and selectively choosing what animals and what beings we choose to love. So this is obviously the identity that I kind of confronted me the most, and that is, so I associated my national identity, I associated my masculine identity, but then I really asked myself, what does it mean to be an animal lover, or in the very least, not an animal hater, or an animal, or causing harm unnecessarily to animals. So I think, and this is obviously the why that a lot of us have linked with, and a lot of us have kind of understood our double standards when it comes to being an animal lover, yet choosing to cause harm and torment to an animal for breakfast, lunch and dinner. And that's something that I think we've all confronted with, and all accepted our responsibility in how many animals we have harmed in our choices up until being vegan. And that was one of the most sobering and confronting thoughts I had, and that was how many animals have suffered and have been slaughtered due to my dietary choices. And that's obviously something that a lot of us have possibly confronted with as well. So, what I like to kind of summarise with it, so that's almost saying that this is an identity that we can actually attach to, that, or redefine what it means to be an animal lover and an unconditional animal lover. So I guess what I'd like to summarise from my talk is what identities are, like how much do they actually help us to cling on to an idea, how that fixes us into a being instead of being open-minded and curious. So when you label yourself as Italian, how much does that narrow-mindedly portray your life trajectory instead of being open-minded and just being not attached to any particular identity? So I think it's, super important for a process for people to look at all aspects of their life and their individuality, and work out how, and using this information to try and discuss with people how some identities and how some attachments can prevent them from becoming vegan, or at least considering being vegan. So I just want to say thank you for listening. I'll kind of keep it brief and leave it there. And I also just want to say well done on all of you being vegan and taking that brave journey of stepping outside of the lane that everyone else is in. It's a very brave decision to make. So I'll leave it there, but I'll also open it to any questions or any comments if people just want to say stuff or ask stuff or anything like that.